You're touring, you're playing the Lollapalooza tour, Tool are playing below you, then you're coming off that and you're headlining Glastonbury, Reading Festival, and then you're driving around in a sports car that you've just bought for in cash, and in front of you is a London bus with the Fat of the Land album on it. Everywhere you look, you can see the Prodigy. Then you kind of think, wow, yeah, this is peaked.
When people do the story in the 90s, they usually do Blur, the Oasis, but Prodigy is getting #1 in 22 countries. I mean, no other British band did that. No other new British band had a #1 album in America in the 90s, only the Prodigy. I still to this day don't know how they pulled that off. And when it got to #1, I remember everyone really buzzing about it, thinking, God, there's actually a revolution going on here.
I would see the Prodigy over the Chemical Brothers, over Underworld, over Orbital any time. If you're at a big festival, a massive rave, or even in the Astoria, surrounded by 1,000 people, you want those lunatics on stage, leaping about, being idiots, going rah at the crowd, and whipping you up.
I'm the trouble starter, punky and instigator.
They're such pioneers. No one has united dance fans, punk fans, indie fans in such a sort of magnificent way as the Prodigy did. They were huge internationally, and once you've had that kind of success, I think once you've sold 15 million records, there's a pressure there to match it, but there's also, it works both ways. That pressure doesn't need to be there, because you can still sell a fifth of the amount of records and it's still 3 million. And the Prodigy are always going to be a good live draw, so long as Keith Flint, can still move.
I'm the bitch you hated, filth infatuated. Yeah. I'm the pain you tasted, felt intoxicated. I'm the fire starter, twisted fire starter. You're the fire starter, twisted fire starter.
You felt that something was really important happening at this moment in time, and it was a level above what they'd done before. And then when I got that break with the band, what the band wanted, they just wanted something that could support, the rumours, the foundation that was going round. The Prodigy are they're this kick-ass live band. And I think that they just needed something that came on stage with them. And I worked on becoming that person, There was some reality in it, there was some truth in it. I wasn't a fake. I did come from the punk world. I did do all that, that groundwork. I was actually in those early punk bands. The leather jacket was a real one. I painted it, no one else. So there was some genuine, true, real thing going on in there, and they wanted that. And I think that when I first played with them, a lot of people saw me on stage and they thought, have they got the guitarist of Rancid in the band here? Who's this new guy? It definitely contributed towards that impression that people were getting of the Prodigy. That they weren't just like, a DJ and a few dancers.
The Prodigy came out of the rave scene, which probably along with punk is the single most important youth movement for the last 20 years, especially in the UK. It just came right out of the blue. I think nobody's really expecting it. It's like the rave scene, like a small club thing. I mean, kind of percolated from the mid-80s onwards, like small pockets, and suddenly, like 87, 88, it just exploded massive, you know, combined to the ecstasy, and then the whole party scene, that Batey thing was re-imported back into the UK. It completely changed youth culture, fashion, music, in like a million ways that the whole kind of mainstream media totally missed because they didn't really understand it at all. So the Prodigy were basically just part of that generation of kids who've been into, you know, some people have been into indie music or rock music or hip-hop. Some of this whole new thing came along and dived into it head first.
They were from the Essex scene and the very beginning of hardcore post the acid house era, and that was probably when it became truly British, rather than this kind of house music, which is a combination of Ibiza and American music. This was when it became really British, so it got that kind of gritty, edgy, piss-takey, laddish, punky sound system, reggae sound system flavours. All of these sort of things started coming in and creating this very aggressive but somehow funny at the same time culture. And you know, it was about taking 10 pills. It was about people getting as far off their nuts as possible. Strictly for the headstrong was the big catchphrase of the MCs at the time. The Prodigy were the epitome of that, really.
Every bit as important to the Prodigy story is the hip-hop scene, which is where Liam Howlett first gained his kind of musical expertise, if you like. He was a hip-hop DJ before he formed the Prodigy, and the use of breakbeats and sample-based music in the Prodigy's work comes very much from Liam's understanding of and awareness of hip-hop culture.
The Prodigy began as Liam Howlett. This was a guy who had messed about with music, been a hip-hop DJ, played with beats, obviously from a very young age. And when Rave came about, suddenly this was an opportunity for a young British bloke who was into his break beats, into the beats of hip-hop, to do something with them, because hardcore obviously included the sped-up hip-hop beat as the central thing in it. And as with everything in Rave, when someone's got some beats, they could take it, or they could give a copy to a DJ and whatever, and they're going to have friends who are also ravers, so he could take his friends with him to a rave, maybe play a track or do a PA, and he needed some people to dance, so he brought his friends.
The initial members of the Prodigy started going out to raves together, and they kind of met up, and Liam would have these kind of mixtapes he was making himself in his bedroom, and he'd be playing them after when they come down after the raves. And I think he lent one of them to Keith, who turned it over to the other side, and it was some of Liam's own music, and they're going, wow, this stuff's absolutely amazing. So the next time they saw him, said, why don't you just get a band, why don't you just get on stage and play, and we'll be your dancers, you know. Liam's like a bedroom kind of whiz kid, you know. He can make absolutely fantastic music, but he's not really an entertainer, you know. You watch the Prodigy live and he's not really the focal point of the group, and I think he's quite happy with that. Whereas someone like Keith Flint is a complete, you know, extroverted kind of character. But he actually made the Prodigy like a band, because if Liam had gone out playing his grooves and his tracks himself, it would have been fairly boring just watching a bloke just pressing buttons on a keyboard. Or, you know, he kind of rocks on stage, but you definitely need the dancers on there to make it. I mean, they are absolutely fantastic. And even in the early days, when it's all kind of, when Keith didn't have his final kind of really cool image, it's just more of like a long ginger-haired guy, and they used to have the most atrocious kind of clothes he wore on stage as well. But his extrovert nature was just like great, because everyone's buzzed up in the crowd, everyone's up, and everybody really wants to have a good time, and they just need like somebody, like a totem or somebody standing there conducting it, and that's basically what he did.
Charlie was a remarkable record, and it could have really killed the Prodigy off right at the beginning, simply because it fits a lot of the parameters that one would normally associate with a novelty hit. It sampled a children's information commercial that had been screened by the BBC in the childhood of Liam and the members of the band, but also people of our general age. It resonated in that particular kind of way that things do when you have a sort of a vague, cheesy memory of something in childhood. So it worked on that level. It made people think back to a time of innocence with some sort of fondness. It was also jocular, but again, those things would really put a record in the same sort of bracket as some sort of one-hit wonder.
Charlie says always tell your mummy before you go off somewhere.
It came out of times a lot kind of gimmicky, kind of like acid house, techno, rave records, just like kind of fast breakbeat and just like a wacky little sample on top. So I think a lot of people kind of dumped into that like a kiddie rave kind of track, but it's always far better than all that kind of stuff. For a start, it's more powerful, much better sound and much more interesting kind of loop going on it as well. And there's kind of the double entendre joke on it as well, being called Charlie, as obviously Charlie's kind of cocaine as well. So it's on one level it seems very, very innocent, but the other level it's kind of it's an underground track. It could work very well as an underground track because it's got a drug reference in it. It's a pretty tough sounding track, and actually it's really stood the test of time because you listen to it now and it sounds great. And in a lot of ways, it precursor a lot of kind of rhythms that people are using 5-10 years later. It's like ahead of its time. It's got like a real bottom end on it. It's a really good track.
Oh, Charlie was the crossover. Charlie was the crossover, definitely. I mean, you know, I was into rock music as well, and I remember Reading Festival in 1991, and it was everywhere. Every tent was blaring Charlie out. You know, this was the one that went beyond the rave scene, and of course it was a chart hit. But the combination of the comedy bit and the synthesizer in it, that Mentasm noise as it's known in the rave world, because the most famous tune prior to that it had been on was Joey Beltram's Mentasm. That sound is such a kind of grinding and psychedelic and brain-twisting noise. So it was that kind of sugar-coated pill of the kiddie stuff, which even a pop kid or an indie kid or whoever could go, I recognise that, ha 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 ha, it's Charlie the Cat. And then this furious noise at the centre of the track made it into quite a Trojan horse kind of thing, whereby this serious rave music could get pushed into the mainstream.
But again, you know, there was lots of bands around at the time, bands like Alternate or SL2, who were rave acts who came out of the same scene as the Prodigy. And at that point, a lot of people probably just identified the Prodigy as just another band. Although it was a strong track, and it was, you know, arguably better than a lot of the ones that the contemporaries were making. But at that point, again, the band hadn't developed into what they would become, so it was still very much a rave song.
The Experience album was important. It crystallised a time and a place. It made a statement, I think, in terms of rave music, that there was more to this scene than novelty hits, than singles, than one-off tracks by faceless DJs and bedroom producers. The album itself went some way towards proving that there was something more substantial going on than just a few riffs and a few good sample ideas. Whether it stood the test of time as an all-time classic is another matter altogether, but I think it was an important way station towards the significant music that they made later on.
Well, the rave scene was very much about releasing singles and having big tunes which could be performed live. A lot of the rave bands would just do PAs rather than full sets. They would get up and do their big song, a couple of other songs. So Experience was really, it was the first rave album, or the first rave album, to have a wider appeal. I think the reason why it was such a success is that it was constructed with a sort of a degree of class which was maybe missing from some of the other rave tunes at the time. It was really well constructed and orchestrated. It's a rave record, but it's so well done that it kind of can appeal to fans of hard music in general, not just the rave scene. You know, it's kind of relentless.
Experience was groundbreaking as far as dance music goes. I can't think of many dance albums of equivalent size and popularity. Afterwards, you had your Left Field and your Underworld and all of these, but the Prodigy really kind of did it first. I mean, you know, university campuses, Essex kids driving around in their cars, whatever, you would hear that album blasting out. It was listened to as an album. People played the whole thing through. So it was, whether it was a brave or a foolhardy move to do that for a scene that was based on 12-inch singles, is a moot point, because actually it worked and everyone loved it as an album.
Out of Space was a song which again took that rave idea of sort of basing it around one strong sample. In this case, it was a song by Max Romeo, who was one of the big reggae artists of the 70s. You know, the timing is very different to their music. Reggae is generally slower and it's played off the beat, whereas the Prodigy just piled on the beats and sort of hammered it home.
Already the Prodigy seemed like a pretty good band. When Out of Space came out, it was just like, wow, this is like sampling Max Romeo. It's like it's Lee Scratch Perry on here as well. This is really, really cool to hear. And also it's got the probably the first time they sampled the Ultramagnetic MCs as well, who became like a place they went back to like several times to get samples and things. And it's great because you've got like a fast bit and a really slow bit, and it shouldn't really work, but it does. And it's, as a piece of music, it's quite revolutionary. It's like, nobody done that was kind of sampling stuff before.
Again, it was a big song just because it sounded so good on the radio, it sounded good live. And it was the Prodigy's hardest moment at that point, I think. Charlie had kind of introduced them, got them into the charts, and this sort of furthered their reputation, I guess.
I think the most important track in terms of explaining where the Prodigy went next is Poison. It's the most overtly hip-hop related track that they'd recorded by that point. It's a fairly simple construction. It's a breakbeat underpinned with massive bass sounds and overlaid pretty much with a straightforward kind of a rap, although in the Prodigy's hands the rap is much more almost of a sort of a terrace chant quality. It's made for the rave environment. It was the perfect fusion, I felt, of hip-hop aesthetics and rave atmosphere, and that definitely was where they were headed.
By 1994, the scene had certainly moved on, and the music for the Jilted Generation album is very interesting because it shows them at a crossroads. The hardcore scene that they'd come from, generally the more creative people by 1994 had moved into jungle drum and bass, where it got much faster, and the black music influence, and particularly the reggae influence, had got much stronger, and a lot of the kind of loved up ideas of rave had maybe been left behind a bit, whereas the other half of the hardcore scene had gone towards happy hardcore, and you could hear a little of that in there. It's kind of sped up, but there's more of the like thudding kick drum. Also by 1994 we were entering the era of the kind of superstar techno producers, so Underworld, Orbital, the Chemical Brothers were just beginning. There were quite a few of these guys who were playing more and more outside the raves in big legal venues across the world, especially in Germany and places like that. America was starting to take to UK dance culture, and you got this much more mainstream techno sound. I think Underworld really being the prime example, and that's what an awful lot of Jilted Generation sounds like. It sounds like they're striving to pull away from rave into what was the successful thing of the time, because every track has the dum 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 techno beat, yet there are still some of the pianos, some of the high-pitched voices left over from rave, so it's a little bit of a hodgepodge, it's a little bit of a halfway house, most of the tracks. But then you have the tracks like Poison,
I got the poison, I got the remedy, I got the plastic to make a remedy.
which just were completely out of nowhere, these heavy, slow hip-hop beats. And I think the Chemical Brothers were trying something similar at the time. They were called the Dust Brothers then. But actually the Prodigy were just that much heavier and that much crunchier and that much more rock almost. And so that's obviously where they found their success would lie. And this came out in the live shows. I mean, this is I think the first time I saw the Prodigy live was probably around 94, 95, and those slow songs sent people absolutely spare. They just sent people pogoing and moshing and hurling themselves around, and you would be in a crowd with you know, a festival or something, and it would be full of ravers, because the rave scene was still there and it was still big, and you get a lot of these quite hooligan-y sort of ravers, and then you get a load of students, you get the indie fans, the rock fans, and as soon as Poison came on, it's the surge of people, and the moshing was absolutely astonishing. So I think they must have seen that as soon as they started playing these songs live, that this was something that they could do.
Voodoo People was definitely a Leeroy song. Definitely. He dominated the whole stage. He took up the entire stage, and if you're going to put a guitar on stage with Leeroy, you know, you need a big riser out of the way. I think that Poison was always going to be like the Keith and Maxim songs. So again, it was, I guess it was that balance. It was, we won't use a guitar on that track. That is going to be the Keith and Maxim song. That is going to be the Leeroy song. This is going to be the guitar song. I'd left a job that I had and went on the dole. Every day I was phoning 5 hours, and I got myself around. So I was going down London, and I was meeting people. One of these people was Morat, and he was a journalist for Kerrang. You know, he phoned me up and says, there's a really big band that are looking for a guitarist. I can't tell you who they are, but what's it like for you at the moment? Are you available? I said, yeah, man. So a day later, the phone rang again, and it was, hello, is Gizz Butt there? Yeah, I'm Gizz. Has Morat been in touch with you? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's told me about a band looking for a guitarist. Do you know who the band is? I said, no, I haven't been told anything. I don't have a clue. And he said, well, it's the Prodigy. Then it was, you know, yeah, this is Keith. You know, I'm Keith from the Prodigy. And I was like, shit, this is real. And he said, yeah, you know, I've been told all about you by Morat. We're really interested in you, and we'd like you to come and get involved.
Do you remember your first gig?
I do. Tea in the Park, 96. Wonderful. 50,000 people. You can imagine, I went from being with the English Dogs and playing in the Sir George Robey pub, knee-deep in piss and cider and stinking punk rockers everywhere, to playing in front of 50,000 punk rockers, knee-deep in piss and cider. But yeah, amazing feeling, really amazing. Yeah, that moment of going out onto the stage, that very first moment, all those people, I've never experienced anything like that. Who does?
It's an important record, I think, sort of culturally, because at the time the government were bringing in the Criminal Justice Bill, which was a really draconian political move. It was a reaction to the whole sort of, it was a late reaction, typical sort of conservative government. They heard about these rave scenes, acid house, they heard about free parties, and they decided they didn't understand it, therefore they would clamp down on it. So in 1993-94 the government introduced this bill which basically restricted the movement of anyone who wanted to throw a free party. And obviously the Prodigy, they were making that step up. They were becoming a mainstream act, but their roots lay in this scene, and really it took someone like the Prodigy to speak out against it. So the whole sort of the tone of the album is one of resistance and rebellion. An obvious song might be Their Law, where the main hook or the main lyrical line is "fuck them and their law." It's a blunt response to what the government were trying to do, and it took someone like that to say it.
I definitely feel that there was an intent there to prove, beyond the advances that they made by simply making an album and staying together and proving the validity of this particular brand of music, this particular subgenre, there was a need there to show that this was a music that could be used to express things that were more complicated than going out and having a good time and enjoying a party. That's all there in the record. I think the reception that it received critically perhaps inflated some of the themes that were in it. I think there was a desire among the critical community to actually find something that was particularly worthwhile from this scene. It was a scene that had been championed and that was exciting, but people wanted it to mean something. There's meaning in this record, but there's perhaps not as much meaning as people projected onto it. But I think it was a very important record for both of those reasons, for the fact that the Prodigy intended there to be things that could be read into it, and for what was read into it later.
Firestarter was quite clearly when the Prodigy really went ballistic internationally. It was when they completely let go of those ties to the dance scene and those attempts to cling on to whatever was the trend in the dance scene at the moment, and became the band, the Prodigy.
First time I heard it, I just thought, wow, you know, it was that guitar intro. What the hell is that?
The following was already there, the press acclaim, you know, the live fan base. But Firestarter was the song which took them into the kind of living rooms, or the sort of the consciousness of the public.
Yeah, Firestarter was another giant step forward. When that came out, it was like, because it had this kind of notorious reputation, where better to go if you want some inspiration being notorious and go back to the Sex Pistols, you know, perhaps the most notorious band of all time. And at this point, for a brief period, the Prodigy became like a 90s version of the Sex Pistols. They had the look, so some of the image is really honed down. Keith Flint looks absolutely fantastic, you know, in the video. He looks cool and scary and mad and funny and dangerous all at once, which is like a perfect kind of pop star. The video of them filmed that kind of subway, they look like a Clockwork Orange kind of gang just standing there. And the song is awesome. It's probably the best single released in the 90s. It's an absolutely fantastic song.
It's easy to forget now how big a song it was at the time and how controversial a song it was. There was a lot of complaints about Firestarter, but there was no real substance to the complaints. It was like, ooh, he's this scary guy and he's sort of advocating arson. I mean, you listen to the song and there's not really a message there. It's a line, you know, it's a line or two which the Prodigy took and they kind of repeat it. It becomes a mantra. It's a chorus. And the band have always said, they've been quite upfront about the fact that a lot of the lyrics don't necessarily mean anything. Critics of music often take things literally, and this is a perfect example of the critics getting something very wrong. But at the same time, it didn't hurt the band. You know, the song was huge worldwide.
From that moment of hearing that song, after just hearing Jilted Generation, hearing Firestarter did kickstart a new beginning. And I reckon one of the reasons why was because so much of the alternative scene the Prodigy had found a place in their hearts at that moment, and Firestarter was the thing that did the next switch.
I think Firestarter is a halfway house between the experiments that had begun with Poison and the album that eventually arrived in 1997, The Fat of the Land. What's surprising about Firestarter now, I think, is listening to how piercing and shrill and perhaps even thin it sounds in comparison with some of the rest of the things that were to be put around it on the Fat of the Land album. It's still a remarkably powerful record. Certainly one of the most abrasive sounding songs ever to have become a #1 hit. But it's almost, I wouldn't say weedy, but it certainly seems less weighty than some of the material that would be bookending it when the album was finally completed. Firestarter as an opening salvo was enormously effective. It became a huge hit and completely changed people's perceptions of the band. Breathe, coming after it, was the perfect combination punch, if you like. It took the developments that Firestarter had initiated and brought them, as they say in hip-hop, to the next level. One of the most amazing things about that record is when you listen to it, there's those swords being drawn as a percussive device that run all the way through it. That's probably a reference to the Wu-Tang Clan, who'd used similar kind of sound effects, but not in a percussive way. It was a really breathtakingly clever piece of thinking from Liam to come up with that. Really works, really sets the track off quite amazingly. But in terms of the actual heaviness and the thickness of the sound, it took the Firestarter template and just enlarged it. Everything seemed to be louder, bigger, stronger, harder, and the aggression and the energy in that track is absolutely boundless. It was the perfect follow-up.
Like Firestarter, it showed a band going, we are not a dance band, we are an electronic rock band, really, and they were making statements as such at that point. You know, they were saying, we're not a rave band, we're not a techno band, and everything they did was about dressing up. It was like heavy metal. It really became like heavy metal. It was, you know, with the Keith and Maxim with the eyeliner and the costumes and the really hammy expressions. You know, it was like watching an Ozzy Osbourne video or something, watching how they performed at that time.
The thing about the Prodigy is they were able to construct these songs and kind of shoehorn lots of ideas into quite a short space of time. They wrote singles. You know, these weren't 8-minute epic you know, dance extravaganzas. They were short, sharp songs like the best of, you know, the punk bands did. And Breathe really kind of, it's just capitalised on what the band were already doing. You know, I think that year, sort of 96 into 97, they were the most exciting band by far. I mean, Britpop was happening. You had bands like Oasis and Blur and, you know, dozens of other bands. But none of them could match the excitement of the Prodigy at that point. And songs like Breathe just worked really well live. That, you know, there was a strong video to go with it, and suddenly the band went global.
I really wanted to play live to Breathe. I wanted that badly. It was a guitar song. It had guitars in it, But there's a problem going on here, and that is because it's dance music using samples. It's constructed in a similar way that when a guitarist constructs something, they'll play it, you know, to a guitar that's tuned to A440. That one is, okay? So it's in a regular kind of tuning. Samples can be in any tuning, and if you've got various samples from various places, that means that the song can go in and out of standard tuning. If you're playing the guitar to it, you've got something to face with here. Basically, your tuning is going to be sitting against something that might not be in tune. I remember one day when I was talking with Liam and I said, can I have a go at playing along to Breathe? And I think it worked really well. I had some ideas, but the tuning, it was just out of tune, and that just straight away left a bad impression, so that wasn't going to happen. Whereas afterwards, I'd gone out and purchased a pitch shifter to actually change the guitar pitch, you know, by tiny divisions, small increments, and just sort of make it shift up and down to go with the samples. But again, we didn't rehearse. The Prodigy didn't rehearse. If we did, we could have got small things like that we could have got right.
After two incredibly strong singles which had really catapulted the band to an entire new level of celebrity and notoriety, The Fat of the Land was always going to do pretty well, but I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams foresaw the extraordinary success that it had around the world as well as in the UK. It was #1 in I think 17 different countries at some point shortly after its release in 1997. The great holy grail of British pop musicians, the idea of cracking America was something that it did with ease. It made the band huge stars over there as well as in the UK and Europe, and it effectively cemented the idea of this rave rock outdoor festival, huge crowd, communal experience thing around the band. It was a record that gave that sound a definition that it hadn't had on record before. It was a very clever piece of construction and a remarkably efficient and effective LP.
I still think it's probably the best Prodigy album in a lot of ways, and it is the best-selling album, and it's their breakthrough album. But it's just I just wanted an album full of like anthemic kind of punk rave songs. You know, I thought, with big dollop of hip-hop lobbed in, and it would have been like that would be one of the best albums of all time instead of being one of the best albums of the 90s. That was the only problem. It's a small problem I had with it. That was the problem. I just wanted the ultimate kind of yobbish anthem of that decade, and to be defined by the Prodigy. Maybe not so much by Oasis' first album, which is a great album as well, but it'd be great if it'd been the Prodigy album, because music would have gone whoa right over there to somewhere kind of really bizarre and interesting.
The dance press, as always, by the Prodigy, were divided. People were able to take it on its own merits, but there was always the argument, oh, it's a bit studentish, you know. Commercial success, it was everywhere. It was absolutely everywhere. And I mean, you know, if you liked them, that was extremely gratifying. After the Jilted Generation, which was such a sort of qualified success, obviously had big tunes, but, you know, Fat of the Land, like Experience, was an album that people would listen to and blast out of their windows from beginning to end, so everyone knew every tune on it.
It's a rock record, basically. It's a rock record made by a dance band, which was a very rare thing. I think in the past, the sort of dance and rock crossover would largely be the sort of domain of rock bands who would maybe bring in some samples or some electronic elements into their music. But never before had there been a sort of dance band, or certainly a band from the rave scene, who went all out to deliver a rock record. Playing these shows around the world, more often than not, they were the only dance act on the bill, you know, playing huge festivals all around Europe, America, wherever. So it's the sound of a band kind of evolving way beyond the expectations of what people had at that point.
Smack My Bitch Up is a very, very silly and really quite good record.
Smack My Bitch Up. I think it is a killer song. It grows throughout the entire track until it finally peaks at that last moment just before it falls down and collapses on the floor in a, in a haze.
Smack my bitch up.
It's a great song, and it's funny, I think. I remember the controversy at the time in the same way that Firestarter sort of brought all this this kind of backlash against the band. It's a positive backlash. And Smack My Bitch Up was a song which on paper sounds like a nasty little misogynistic number, but it wasn't. Anyone with an understanding of sort of electronic music and hip hop kind of got the reference. Prodigy took the line, built a song around it, and because they didn't really give much of a fuck about what people thought, they weren't pandering to radio programmers, they didn't care less about offending parents, they weren't making music for 6-year-old kids, they were making music for anyone who wanted it.
It's a bit of a boys will be boys situation. I don't think it was probably intended to be pro-domestic violence. If you listen to it in the context of the Kool Keith record that it sampled from, it doesn't sound that way. It's just like, it's a hyping phrase. It's just kind of go, whip it up, get the energy up, something like that. It's a silly phrase. I mean, Kool Keith has had some dodgy lines about women in some of his raps, but I don't think he's actually saying hit a woman. But the Prodigy are smart enough boys to probably know that it would bother a few people to use that as the chorus of a single. Boys will be boys. They were whipping up, they were winding people up, and they wound people up. And whether that's a good thing, who knows?
At this point, making this record, there was an atmosphere around the band, and certainly Liam Howlett's feeling was that he didn't want to be the biggest band in the world, although he knew that that was within his grasp. He didn't want to be Oasis, he didn't want to be the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. He wanted the Prodigy to be, he explained to me on the eve of the release of the album that he wanted the Prodigy not to be something that everyone and their mums and dads would like. He wanted there to be stuff in the music that would repel people and push them away. He wanted it to be for insiders, for fans, for devotees, not just for the casual listener. And I think that you have to see the inclusion of a track like Smack My Bitch Up and its seemingly insane title and chorus hook line in that context. It's meant to be angry and aggressive, it's meant to be offensive, and it's meant to be something that's going to divide people. It certainly did that job.
They started out as a rave outfit, but by the fat of their land, they were up there with Sex Pistols or Led Zeppelin or Nirvana or Rage Against the Machine. They were a band who could really deliver live. There was something to see, and there was a seeing them live, there was just this massive energy in the crowd. You know, there's that sort of euphoric sort of side of dance music, but there was that also that sort of the outlet which rock music provides fans. It's that people would just go mental to the Prodigy because the music was so forceful and so physical as well. I think you could feel the music. So really, you know, by the time of Fat of the Land, I can't think of any band who were that exciting to watch live.
By the time the Prodigy were ready to go on the road to promote the Fat of the Land, they had effectively become the best live band in the world. There was nobody better. They had the atmosphere and the training that they'd acquired in handling crowds, coming up through the rave scene from fairly small PAs in out-of-the-way clubs through illegal raves in warehouses and big fields. They were primed to be the festival band to end all festival bands, and that's what they then went out and did.
They played a lot of rock bills and they crossed them right over to the rock kids. They're always a high point of a rock festival, you know. They'd be like second, third on the bill, and they just like tear it apart. You know, bands found it very difficult to follow them. So in that period, at that time, between about 94 and probably about 96, 97, every festival you went to, like Reading or any festival in America or anywhere you went to, like in Europe, the Prodigy would be playing, they're relentlessly touring, and I think that's really crucial to their success. They toured hard, they toured like a proper rock band.
The live sets have tended to stick to anthems, but there's, on each album there is 3 or 4 tracks that A, everybody knows, B, have huge riffs or huge breakdowns or a bit that everyone can sing along to, whereas a lot of, particularly the early tracks, in fact, both of the first 2 albums were full of dance tunes, and they had interesting samples and stuff on, but they didn't have that massive hook. They were for the rave, and they were for, you know, mixing into other tunes. Whereas something like Outer Space or Poison, with a massive riff in it, or Firestarter or Breathe, those are tunes where it's got a bit that hits suddenly and everyone can go, yay! And that works on stage, and Liam's smart enough to know that that's what people really want to hear, and that's what they can deliver, and he constantly reworks them. I mean, you know, every time you see a Prodigy show, he'll have stretched a section out or teased a bit more with how he's going to drop in that big important bit of the tune. So you know, he keeps it fresh.
I think when the Fat of the Land came out, it was huge. You can't kind of underestimate the success of that record. The Fat of the Land sold like 15 million records because they went out there and toured. I guess the only downside was that when a record goes big, you're out there day after day promoting it, and it doesn't give you a chance to make much in the way of new music. So I guess if there's one mistake that the Prodigy have made throughout their careers, that they probably left it a little bit too long to produce a follow-up to the Fat of the Land.
I think Liam in particular found following up the Fat of the Land quite a difficult thing to do. They did take some time off, but after they'd taken 2 years promoting and marketing the record and pushing it and playing shows and generally making sure that they remained the biggest band in the world for quite a while, Liam bought a house and fitted a big state-of-the-art studio in it, and found that he couldn't really do anything in that studio, that the vibe wasn't right. The dirty, grimy, rootsy authenticity that he strove to bring to his music just wasn't something that he could get out of this effectively you know, rock star trappings in a mansion in Essex. It wasn't until he went back to working in a really basic and simple way, making beats from samples on his Apple laptop using a piece of £200 software that you can download from the internet, that he really started to get the vibe back that he needed to make Prodigy music.
Always outnumbered. I'm afraid that at the time I blew with the wind, and there were a number of reasons to kind of go, it's rubbish. first and most obvious was the celebrity guests. It was, you know, it was Twister who was on every single hip-hop record at that time as the guest rapper, and it just felt like they were, I don't know, whether it was trying to break America or whether it was like trying to be like the big hip-hoppers, some sort of megalomania going, I'm like Dr. Dre, I'll get Twister on my record. And it felt a little bit like, for the first time, Liam was following rather than being bang on the trend and bang on with what was happening at the time. It felt like he was running a little bit late with the sound. But listening back to it, kind of a year later, it's actually a really, really good album. It's all of the guests on it are so distorted by Liam's production that it sounds Prodigy. You probably couldn't guess who any of them are if you were just played the tracks. You wouldn't know that there's some celebrity or know that it's Twister rapping or whatever. It sounds like a Prodigy record, and it actually sounds like a Prodigy record with the production game stepped up a whole nother level from Fat of the Land. It really, really kicks.
Always Outnumbered, Never Outgunned was a deserved hit record. I mean, I guess the only criticism I would have of that record is that it sounds very much like a Prodigy record, which is an odd criticism to make. But with each previous album, they'd really evolved. They'd moved on. They went from the Rave album to the rock album to this sort of international, almost stadium type band. With Always Outnumbered, it was kind of you know, it was the Prodigy record. But it was a good record. They've never released a bad album, and there was some singles on there which, you know, deserved a lot of attention, and they got it.
You can sit and analyse all of the different qualities that make up a Prodigy track, and there are things about the way that the drums sound, that the bass sounds, the way that the different sonic elements of the track are introduced in a layered sort of a way, and then the way that the track thickens as it goes on, that it starts from a sort of a thin point, almost a needle point that inserts itself into your brain, and then it sort of gets wider and spreads out and causes more pain and damage as the further in it goes. A lot of it sonically is down to Liam, but the makeup of the group dictates how he thinks and how he produces and how he feels. And while he has that energy and while he's got those other personalities to feed off of, I don't see that there'll ever be a point where you'll put on a Prodigy record and forget who it is that you're listening to.
Well, the Prodigy, like, they pull in loads of different kind of styles, but they do somehow make it their own stamp on there, which is quite hard to do when you haven't got one set of vocalists, because usually it's the vocalist which dictates the sound of a band. You mean, most bands, well, let's face it, most guitar bands sound the same, really, don't they? And the singing makes it sound slightly different, you know. With the Prodigy, it's like, even though they're using loads of different styles and different kind of beats, yes, the first 30 seconds as the song's building up or whatever, it could be anybody, but you're not quite sure if it's them if you've never heard the track before. By the time the track comes in, or there are certain staples to their sound which you recognise, like the beats kind of switching speed or whatever, and the kind of they always have a really interesting kind of synth sound, kind of quite a dirty synth sound kind of going there. Like, always very interesting use of samples, the way they kind of like mix the hip hop and the rock and the rave together. It's there, you know. It's definitely a discernible kind of sound in the Prodigy thing. You know, you can tell it's them, and probably for those kind of reasons.
I think the real kind of essence of the Prodigy is it's a very British thing. They took the stupidity of heavy metal and of punk rock and the dressing up and the idiocy and the leaping about and the violence and applied it to rave and dance music. And you know, other people tried to do that over the years, but really they were the ones that got it right.
I think there's always going to be a place for the Prodigy in alternative music, always, because Liam can still write a cracking song. You know, the sound, you know that Liam's written it. This is this strange thing about his songwriting. Even, you know, always outnumbered, never outgunned. Even that, there's a feel, there's an energy in it, which is the Prodigy, and it just comes from Liam. It's his choice of it's his personality coming through his, you know, his choice of samples, his music, the way he alters everything. He alters everything massively. You know, you could play something, give it to Liam, he will completely morph it. You know, it will become Liam. You know, he actually played me the original Firestarter riff, and it didn't really sound anything like the Firestarter riff. So, yeah, he turns it into him. So, I think there's always going to be a place for the Prodigy in the alternative festival, you know, circuit, the live circuit, always. And I think that's where they belong, as opposed to, you know, straight kind of dance music, you know, techno, drum and bass dance music, you know. That didn't interest me then, and it doesn't now.